Revenge with Karen.
I knew it was over the second he called the server room quaint. He hadn't even set his vegan lunchbox down yet. Just strutted in like he was auditioning for a pharmaceutical ad, flashing veneers and arrogance in equal measure. Said something about reimagining operational agility. I watched him take one slow, smug look around the control center. Years of wires, patch notes, power backups, handwritten failover guides taped neatly beside the routers. Say, wow, this place is a museum. We used to call it the Heart Room. Not official, but it fit. When the old director retired, Greg, a man who'd once hand-soldered a patch panel during a snowstorm because FedEx was delayed, it was like the place exhaled. Not relief. Just the slow goodbye of a system that knew no one coming after him would ever understand it. I've been here 8 years. I'm not flashy. My handwriting is clean, my process is meticulous. I've seen this operation through 3 mergers and 2 attempted takeovers. I've stopped cascading outages with duct tape and a borrowed VPN. I've trained people who now run entire departments in Dallas and Omaha. I've built this thing to bend without breaking. So when director Vincent Gray waltzed in like he was late to his own coronation, I kept my mouth shut. He was everything I expected, used words like synergize and sunset the legacy stack before he'd even seen the load distribution logs. He sniffed at the network topology map I'd hand-drawn when we rerouted the Chicago failover zone, then laughed, actually laughed, when I handed him the clipboard. This, he said, holding it like it was a wet sock. You still use paper, this is antiquated. And just like that, he tossed it into the trash can next to my desk. Didn't even look at the bottom. Clipboard held 8 years of operational wisdom. Not abstract theory, not vendor promises, real fixes. Notes in the margins on how to reboot the Palmetto region without triggering timeout errors in Kansas City. Which data center had that janky breaker panel? Which router hiccuped during daylight saving changes unless you manually cycled it first? And buried beneath those schemas, on the very last page, in red Sharpie, something I'd added after I caught a pattern no one else even thought to look for. When the load index exceeds 9.2, failover will misroute to null. Do not override manual override. I watched him throw it away. Didn't say a word. That was day 1. He brought in a crew of consultants, all smiles and thick-lensed glasses, who talked a lot about cloud migration and streamlined redundancy, but kept asking me where to find the firewall logs. Ran a half-baked discovery audit, took photos of our existing systems like tourists, and held 3 meetings just to decide what color the new dashboard should be. Meanwhile, I kept showing up early, earlier than usual, just to stand in the room when it was still quiet, hum of fans and drive lights blinking like Morse code. Sometimes I'd hold that clipboard in my hands before the day began, flipping through pages like a prayer book. Then I'd put it back, right where he left it, in the trash. Maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have pushed back harder. But I've seen people like him before. You try to warn them, they think you're just bitter, territorial, stuck in the past. They don't understand that the past is the only reason the present still functions. By the end of week 2, he called a meeting. Stood up in front of the team, what was left of us, and said, "We're going to start from scratch. This operation is a rust bucket. I've been brought in to modernize it." I didn't look up. I just wrote one word in my notebook, observed. When it came my turn to speak, he pointed to my notes and asked, "Is that the new system documentation?" "No," I said flatly. "It's my lunch order." He didn't laugh. "Look, I don't mean to be blunt," he said, already meaning to be blunt, "but you'll need to digitize your knowledge. These scribbles won't cut it anymore. We need scalable solutions, not nostalgia." Word nostalgia hung in the air like a bad smell. My stomach turned, but I smiled. A cold one. "I'll get right on that," I said, but I didn't, not the way he wanted. Instead, I photocopied the clipboard pages, every single one, and locked them in my bottom drawer at home. The original stayed in the trash can, untouched. The day Greg retired, he left me a note. Just 3 words, keep it breathing. I'm not stupid. I knew what was coming. Could see it in the way the new guy's eyes glazed over during system architecture briefings. How he winced when we mentioned the routing dependencies between warehouse clusters. He wasn't here to learn the system. He was here to replace it with something he could take credit for. He wanted plug and play, not maintenance, not responsibility, just a sleek dashboard to show the board of directors. Well, he was gonna get his dashboard. And when he did, it was going to be very shiny, very expensive, and very, very fragile. By the end of his first month, Vincent had a laminated roadmap pinned to the breakroom bulletin board, 4 colors, 12 phases, and not a goddamn clue among them. He called it Operation Streamline, like this was some feel-good rebranding campaign and not a live surgery on the logistical heart of a national distribution network. Phase 1. Immediate reduction of legacy middleware dependencies. Translation: rip out our glue code without asking what it's glued to. He brought in a SAW suite with a 5-syllable name and a login that crashed 3 times during the demo. Phase 2. Decentralize manual overrides in favor of auto-resolve logic trees. I asked him once what happens when the tree loops back into itself. He blinked like I'd spoken Aramaic. Well, then the system will learn not to do that again. That was my first flag. Quiet. Polite. The weekly round table I wasn't technically invited to. Just a note, I said, tapping a line on the ops plan they projected. We've seen recursive loops in that failover chain before. It'll eat itself if the auto-resolve doesn't fail clean. He smiled, like a camp counselor. Thanks for that perspective, but we need to let go of old ghosts if we want to grow. I didn't argue, just made a note. Loop will eat itself. Director smiles. A week later, deployed the new warehouse sync API. Never mind that it didn't account for time zone offsets or real-time GPS pings from our own fleet. That thing treated Oregon and Ohio like they were sipping the same daylight. We got order duplicates, ghost deliveries, phantom inventory counts that made it look like Cincinnati had 1,000 pallets of frozen chicken it didn't actually have. Second flag. Also quiet. Single Slack message to the engineer on duty. We've seen this sync bug before. During daylight saving, it'll miscount shipments and trigger false cold chain violations. He read it, hearted it, forwarded it to Vincent. Vincent replied in the thread himself, appreciate the caution, but we've moved past legacy concerns. Let's not get distracted by noise. Eyes on the vision. Noise. A full decade of system edge case handling and fail-safe protocols, called noise by a man who thought DevOps was a gym class. That afternoon, I walked past the bin near the back stairwell. My clipboard was still there, still face down, a thin smudge of old coffee on the corner. It had become a symbol by then, his little trophy of victory. A monument to the old guard he thought he'd buried. What he didn't know was that I'd already rewritten a private version of the routing schema, color-coded, mapped out on 11x17 sheets, tucked in a binder at home. And at the bottom of every one, same warning in red ink, 9.2 is death. Do not override the override. It wasn't some poetic prophecy. It was math, cold math. Every time load index crept above 9.2 and we forced an automated reroute without manual approval, the system dumped orders into a null state. Not lost, just gone, like a magician's scarf pulled into oblivion. Greg and I had tested it years ago, during that blizzard that shut down 3 zones. That bug never made it into the Jira archive. It lived in the margins, in the clipboard, and now it lived in the trash, under a half-eaten salad and some consultant's crushed La Croix. Meanwhile, Vincent strutted through the building like Caesar after crossing the Rubicon. He'd pause by people's desks, spout some garbage about disruption with dignity, and then tell them their roles were being repurposed for the future. Translation: legacy heads were rolling. Cindy, who'd handled zone balancing during peak flu season, gone. Tomas, who built the bridge between our dispatch app and the regional truck's onboard nav, reassigned to analytics. Greg's old assistant, who knew which printers needed manual firmware reboots, retired early after her job description evolved. I stayed. I stayed because I had one job left, and it wasn't to save the system. It was to finish the record. I started tracking every change they made, every override, every skipped QA pass, every time Vincent grinned through a problem instead of solving it. I printed out the diffs from staging to production, marked them in red, filed them away. One night, alone in the control room, I pulled the clipboard from the trash. It still smelled faintly of toner and citrus cleaner. Still had the oil smudge from Greg's thumb on the edge of page 5. I flipped to the final page and underlined the red text with a ruler. Then I placed it back, same bin, same spot. Not out of resignation, out of ceremony. They started peeling off my team like old decals on a company truck, one by one, without eye contact. Resource alignment, Vincent called it in the Monday stand-up, like he was assembling a damn IKEA shelf and not gutting the soul of a live operation. By Thursday, Anya from DevOps was reassigned to cross-functional integration, which meant she now sat in a windowless room 2 floors up, translating Vincent's buzzword bingo into actual tasks for the outside consultants. She texted me a single line after her re-onboarding. He asked what DNS is. I told him it wasn't a podcast. Next was Alex. 6 years of back-end patchwork wizardry, placed by a 22-year-old contractor from a staffing agency that also advertised dog-walking services. Alex didn't argue. He just cleared his desk and left his access badge face up on his chair, a little funeral. They kept me, though, for now. Vincent said I was too embedded to move mid-project. His exact words were, "We need your tribal knowledge. Can't afford a gap there." That's when I knew. When a man like that uses tribal knowledge, he's already mapping your exit. It's not a compliment, it's a countdown. Next day, I got an email from HR titled KT Prep. That's knowledge transfer for the uninitiated corporate euthanasia. They wanted my core workflows, exception handling guides, and redundant recovery logic documented and centralized in Confluence. Fine. I gave them everything they asked for. 1,000 lines of cleaned-up flowcharts, an entire wiki section on load distribution heuristics, annotated JSON files with legacy, fallback logic explained in 6th grade English. But the real warnings, the ones that mattered, I didn't put online. Those went somewhere else. I started a new notebook. Black hardcover, no logos. I used ink, not digital. Each section mimicked the documentation I submitted officially, but this version had red markings. Notes in the margins, sarcastic annotations only someone who'd lived through our worst outages would understand. Like, during peak load, the new queuing algorithm will panic at 7.8 and begin mislabeling dispatch zones. Congratulations, you've just sent seafood to Arizona. Or, if they remove manual overrides for South Ridge Warehouse, the auto temp sensors will default to Celsius and freeze the HVAC at 16 degrees. Good luck moving yogurt with icicles on the pallet. Of course, on the last page, written again in clean, deliberate red, when the load index exceeds 9.2, failover will misroute to null. Do not override manual override. I'd already memorized the risk scenarios by heart. I didn't write this stuff for myself. I wrote it because I needed a record. Not a defense, just an echo. Something that would still exist when they swore no one ever warned them. I began arriving 30 minutes early every day, not to work, just to watch. I'd stand outside the ops bullpen with a gas station coffee, listening. Why is the Ohio region duplicating order packets? Does anyone know if we're still doing temperature flags on reroutes? Wait, did we unplug the old sync bridge already? They didn't know. None of them knew. At lunch, I'd vanish. No invites, no explanations. Just long, silent walks through the warehouse mezzanine or down to the old IT locker room where the signal didn't reach and the lights flickered like it was haunted. I started carrying the black notebook everywhere, never left it on my desk, never let it out of arm's reach. If I had to die professionally, I'd at least do it on my own terms, with my own version of the truth in my hands. The contractors flooded in next. All smiles and lanyards and branded fleece jackets. Most of them didn't know what we did here. One of them, a fresh-faced kid named Declan, leaned over my cube one morning and asked if order flow referred to how customers place their online shopping carts. I didn't answer, just pointed at the whiteboard map of our pipeline flow. He stared at it like I'd drawn the Large Hadron Collider. Vincent called me into a meeting that afternoon, told me how proud he was that I was on board with the transition. I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." He grinned like he'd won something, like I'd just congratulated him on his promotion instead of preparing his future autopsy. That night, I took the clipboard from the trash again. The page with the red warning was still clean, still legible. I pressed it flat against my desk and traced the letters once more, just to make sure they were burned into memory. Then I slid it back into the bin, where it belonged, where it would be found. They called it a soft launch, which was corporate speak for we're not ready, but we're doing it anyway. The plan, such as it was to run Vincent's shiny new pipeline parallel to the legacy system. Same input, split feed, so they could compare outputs in a live environment. In theory, that meant nothing broke. In practice, it meant things started breaking in 2 places at once. At first, it was small. Few zip codes in rural Missouri got flagged as commercial zones, triggering incorrect surcharges. Then a handful of medical shipments were bumped from cold chain to standard delivery, arriving lukewarm and useless. The new system didn't fail, exactly, it just drifted, like a car slowly veering off the road while the driver fiddled with the radio. The legacy system caught the discrepancies, of course. It still had all its handwritten logic tucked inside, backdoors and weird exceptions and conditional flags we'd stacked like Jenga blocks over a decade. But when I brought up the mismatches during the Tuesday metrics sync, Vincent barely looked up from his iPad. "That's just legacy tech debt surfacing," he said, waving it off like a mosquito. "We expected some noise. The sooner we cut over, the sooner that signal becomes clean." I wanted to laugh. Tech debt? The only debt was his, and the interest was compounding hourly. Don't call it tech debt when the thing keeping your lights on is the same thing you're racing to unplug. But I didn't argue. I'd already gone silent. He wasn't listening, and I was done translating experience into bullet points for someone who thought every system problem could be solved with a consultant and a coffee subscription. I walked out of that meeting, unplugged my company laptop from the dock, and disabled all system alerts from my work email. I grabbed my old ThinkPad from my locker, the one with the cracked corner and a faint smell of burnt coffee, and routed my personal alerts to it. Installed nothing new. No company VPN, no shared drives. Just a terminal window, a dashboard feed, and a few scripts Greg and I had written back when the company still trusted engineers more than invoices. By Thursday, the load index hit 6.3. By Friday afternoon, 7.1. It started creeping. Slowly, like the first drip from a cracked pipe that no one hears until it floods the crawl space. The load index measures how close the system is to max capacity, not just volume, but chaos, reroutes, failovers, latency stacking, cold chain errors, database timeouts. When it crosses 9.2 without manual intervention, the whole thing tips sideways. Orders don't just slow down, they vanish. Routes reroute to null, visible digital trash compactor. I told him that, twice, once in person, once in Sharpie, and now it was inching toward the edge. Vincent didn't notice. He was too busy having his name added to the company newsletter as transformation lead. His roadmap had now reached Phase 5, legacy system drawdown, which meant he was actively shutting down the safety net while the trapeze artist was midair. The Slack channel was a war zone of emojis and exclamation points. East Coast warehouse duplicated a night route again. Are we missing the Tuesday bulk push for grocery accounts? Anyone else seeing triple auth on the QA environment? The answers were always the same, looking into it. Probably caching issues. Legacy API is interfering with our projected results. Meanwhile, the legacy system wasn't interfering. It was correcting, was catching their bad guesses, and quietly rerouting around them like a parent cleaning up after a toddler with a paintbrush. But it couldn't do that forever. Not without help. Not once the cutover became final. And that's exactly what Vincent ordered on Monday. He announced it in a department-wide email at 6:48 a.m. As of this Friday, we will sunset the legacy system. All operational pipelines will transition to the new architecture. No risk, no reward, no risk. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I felt my molars shift. That morning, I arrived an hour early. I sat in the back corner of the control room with my personal laptop, logged into the legacy dashboard, and just watched. Load index 8.0. I texted myself the number, just to have it logged somewhere that didn't belong to them. Vincent held another meeting that afternoon, talking about the value unlock this cutover would bring. Said we were finally going to turn the corner into full autonomy. Half the team stared at him like he was building a spaceship. The other half stared like they were already on fire and just trying not to make eye contact with the flames. I kept my face neutral, nodded where appropriate, said nothing. But in my notebook, I added a single line, Friday, 2:00 p.m. cutover scheduled. Load index at 8.0. They think it's normal. It wasn't normal. It was the sound of a system holding its breath. And I was the only one listening. He scheduled the one-on-one like it was a casual coffee chat. No subject line. Just a calendar block titled Sync, Thursday at 4:15 p.m., end of day, end of patience. I knew what it was. He was already seated when I walked into conference room B. The blinds were drawn for drama, laptop open but untouched. He wanted to make a point about how little I mattered to whatever spreadsheet he was pretending to read. He looked up with that managerial smile, tight, toothy, full of bullshit vitamins. "Thanks for making the time," he said, gesturing at the chair across from him like I needed an invitation to my own eulogy. I sat, crossed my arms, said nothing. So he began, lacing his fingers together like he was about to propose. I wanted to check in, noticed some distance. A lack of enthusiasm, maybe. He tilted his head, that therapist tilt. He'd been rehearsing this, You've been with this org for a while, I respect that. But we're heading in a new direction. We need full alignment. Are you still committed to the new vision? There it was. The final breadcrumb before the fall. I smiled, flat. No teeth, no warmth, just enough to be polite while carving the gravestone. I'm exactly where I need to be. He blinked at that, just once. It wasn't the response he wanted. He was hoping for an apology, maybe tears, some show of fear or gratitude. Instead, I sat there like cold granite. Well, he said, leaning back, I appreciate the honesty. I'll note that, he would. I left without shaking his hand. By Friday morning, my name was gone from the weekly ops update. I wasn't CC'd on the incident review threads. My Slack access shriveled overnight. First, I was removed from Hash Logistics Core, Hash InfoWatch, then even the damn Hash Team Lunches channel. The final insult? They gave my Jira permissions to one of the contractors, Declan, the human haircut. I didn't fight it, didn't ask questions, didn't even raise an eyebrow because I'd already won. The work that mattered, the real work, was done. Quietly, methodically, without permission. I'd rerouted the critical alerts to a machine they couldn't touch, an old home server in my basement. Greg and I used to call it Cerberus, because it had 3 fail-safes and never barked unless something was truly on fire. Cerberus now ran silent, headless, logged in via VPN through an IP they'd never trace. It had the original failover schema, the real-time load index tracker, and every threshold alert routed to a burner number only I could read. I'd set up cron jobs to ping me when the load ticked over 8.5, 8.8, 9.0, most importantly, 9.2. Because at 9.2 their system wouldn't crash, it would vanish. Not with a bang, but with a soft digital sigh, orders evaporating into null, invoices routed to nowhere, warehouses waiting for trucks that were never dispatched. A ghost operation haunting its own databases. They'd blame tech debt. They'd blame QA. They'd try to blame me, but I'd already been erased. And besides, I'd left everything they needed in the trash. All week, I walked through the halls like a relic no one wanted to admit still worked. People gave me side glances. Some pitied me. Some assumed I'd finally burned out. No one knew I still held the blueprint. Not digitally, not on their precious wiki, but in my head, in ink, in paper. They couldn't delete that. Friday afternoon, as the buzz built for the final queued-over deployment, Vincent sent a team-wide message celebrating the next chapter of operational excellence. I read it once, then archived it. At 1:17 p.m., Cerberus pinged me, load index, 8.6 right on time. I closed my laptop, tucked the black notebook into my bag, grabbed my coat, and walked out the front door like it was any other day. But it wasn't. It was the last time anyone in that building would be able to say they knew what they were doing. Friday, 11:47 a.m. I closed my terminal window, locked my screen, and walked out without a word. No goodbye, no heading to lunch, no passive-aggressive Slack status change with a coffee emoji. Just silence. The kind that hums louder than any exit speech ever could. My badge still worked. My ID still scanned. But the system that mattered, the one in my head, the one behind all their dashboards, had already logged out. The parking lot baked in late summer sun, as I passed row after row of leased SUVs and hybrid sedans, each one driven by someone who still believed in Vincent's roadmap, or at least pretended to. I cut across the mulch bed behind the northeast wing, past the old bike rack, and into the alley behind Jefferson Street. 3 blocks later, I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe with a view of the glass box they called HQ. Same view Greg and I used to take when we needed to talk off-grid. Back when talking still helped. I ordered a black coffee and a croissant. No ceremony, no emotion. Just the same calm you feel before a thunderstorm breaks the heat. At 12:06, I opened the dashboard on my phone. Cerberus had already pinged me, load index. 8.7, they'd accelerated routing again. Probably under Vincent's orders, probably to smooth out latency discrepancies before the 2 p.m. queued over. I imagined him pacing the ops floor right now, bouncing between teams, using words like final validation and post-legacy architecture stabilization. I imagined the engineers nodding along, smiling the way people do when their job depends on not asking follow-up questions. At 12:48, I saw the Midwest region spike. A false cold chain reroute to the wrong tiered carrier. Their system corrected for it, sort of. But it created 2 duplicate dispatch tickets and sent one to an offline loading dock in Akron. Cerberus logged it quietly. New anomaly pattern. Index 8.9, I sipped my coffee. The sky started to gray. Back in the office, the CEO was in the budget room, wrestling with next quarter's projections. I knew because the meeting had been on the shared calendar for a week, listed as Q4 containment strategy. That meant he'd be unavailable, unreachable, and most importantly, unaware. Vincent had picked the moment well. For him, this was the touchdown dance. The system had been propped up just long enough to convince everyone the handoff was smooth. He was probably already fantasizing about a promotion, maybe even pitching himself as a candidate for some innovation in logistics, a word nobody had heard of. He didn't know the floor beneath him was paper, didn't know Cerberus was listening. At 1:23, the West Coast started reporting sync delays, just milliseconds, but enough to stack over time. At 1:41, one of the new contractors, poor Declan, posted in #ops latency asking if anyone else is seeing weird lag on the QA shadows. No one replied. The old hands were gone, and the new ones were too scared to admit they didn't know what normal looked like. 1:49 p.m. I refreshed the dashboard again. Load index, 9.0. Cerberus beeped. A quiet chime. Nothing urgent, just a reminder, a nudge. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathed. The kind of breath you take when the work is done and all that's left is gravity. 1:56 p.m. The cafe filled with the scent of fresh espresso and distant ozone. A storm was coming. I watched as the final status flag on the dashboard flipped from legacy assist. Active to legacy system. Retired. No ceremony, no backup. Just a single mouse click on the wrong screen. 1:58 p.m. Load index, 9.1. I took the last bite of my croissant. Flaky, overbaked, just like the strategy memo Vincent had attached to that morning's all-staff email. Then, as the wind picked up and a single brown leaf skittered across the pavement, Cerberus buzzed once more. Load index, 9.2. Failover threshold breached. Routing anomalies detected. Inside that glass fortress, alarms would be starting to chirp. Not blaring, just confused. Like a smoke detector catching whiffs of something it can't quite name yet. And somewhere in the ops war room, surrounded by dashboard lag and unread wikis, someone would glance at the trash bin in the corner. Still sitting there, half crumpled, faint stain on the corner, was my clipboard, the final page still visible. Red ink underlined. When the load index exceeds 9.2, failover will misroute to null. Do not override manual override. They never read it. But now they'd feel it. 2:14 p.m. The dashboard flickered once, just a hiccup, like a skipped heartbeat, and then the numbers started bleeding red. Load index, 9.3. Error rate surge, plus 138% average response time. Infinity Cerberus logged it calmly, like a surgeon calling time of death. Inside HQ, monitors were blinking in slow, sick waves. Terminal windows filled with timeout errors. Order queues ballooned from hundreds to thousands in under 60 seconds. The East Coast pipeline, the one feeding 3 major grocers and a hospital network, linked out like someone had yanked the plug from the wall. Dispatchers stared at their screens, mouths slack. Orders were dropping into the void. No trace, no timestamp, just the word null in 5 states: New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, gone. The routing logic, rewritten by a consulting team that thought redundancy meant storing backups in Google Drive, was eating itself alive. Without manual override protocols, system looped back on broken logic trees, trying to reroute through paths that no longer existed. It was like watching a GPS send ambulances into lakes. Someone shouted from the war room, "Are we under attack?" No, someone else answered, eyes wide, voice thin. "We did this." Vincent stood in the middle, holding a dry erase marker like it was a weapon. Check the staging nodes, reboot the dynamic scheduler. It's probably just a caching issue. But the cache was clear. Dynamic scheduler was pinging endpoints that hadn't existed since last night's final cutover. One engineer, the last one who still remembered how the legacy system worked, opened the documentation to search for manual rollback instructions. There was nothing. The legacy doc wiki had been deleted that morning. Sunset completed, the ticket said, and my name nowhere on it. At the cafe, I finished my espresso and watched the storm finally break. Sheets of rain smacked the pavement as the wind rolled in, scattering napkins and a patio umbrella into traffic. I refreshed the dashboard again. Warehouse confirmations, timeout. Delivery dispatch, offline. Inventory sync, error null route. Live route map empty. All 5 affected states showed a sea of blank. Not red, not blinking, just nothing. I imagined the Midwest warehouse manager on a headset, screaming for trucks that were never sent. Dispatchers refreshing tablets that showed empty queues. Grocers waiting for dairy pallets that had never left the dock. The chilled goods, the blood packs, the chemo shipments, somewhere in limbo, forgotten by a system that forgot what real meant. Vincent was probably demanding logs. He'd find them. They'd all say the same thing: route right arrow null, because null isn't an error. It's the absence of memory. And it was written into the system the moment they deleted the override code. The same line I'd etched in red ink on a page they never bothered to read. I paid my bill in cash, left a generous tip, and stood under the awning to watch the clouds deepen. Across the street, inside HQ, lights blinked like emergency strobes. Shadows darted. Panic bloomed behind glass. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just watched, because the work was done. 2:17 p.m. Ops War Room had become a pressure cooker sealed with buzzwords and fear sweat. Every screen screamed red. Error logs poured in like floodwater. Dispatch time showed zeros. The Midwest pipeline had vanished. Not stalled, vanished. The new system, a stitched-together Frankenstein of consultant optimism and broken dependencies, was spinning itself into oblivion. No one could explain it. Declan, pale as printer paper, was stammering something about queue loops. Someone else was unplugging and replugging a monitor like that would resuscitate the routing logic. A senior engineer kept whispering, "It shouldn't be doing this," over and over like a prayer. Then the CEO walked in. Gray suit, black coffee, Bluetooth still in his ear. He'd been pulled from the budget meeting with a vague, panicked message: ops failure, live queued over collapsing. Midwest and East Coast affected. He didn't ask for a recap, asked a question. What the hell is going on? No one answered. Vincent opened his mouth and said something about unexpected recursive behavior, but it didn't land. It sounded like he was reciting tech jargon he barely understood, because he was. His hands moved over the whiteboard like he could draw his way out of the abyss, but there was no logic left to map. The systems weren't routing. The backups weren't engaging. The fallback logic had been gutted. CEO looked around the room, really looked, and saw the panic, the chaos, the broken chain of understanding. Then, without a word, he crossed the room to the trash bin, and there it was. Still, the clipboard, sitting sideways under a discarded event badge and a stale protein bar wrapper. A little stained, a little crumpled, but unmistakable. He reached in, pulled it out, wiped it with the cuff of his sleeve, flipped to the last page, and stopped. He stared at the sentence, written in thick, deliberate red ink. When the load index exceeds 9.2, failover will misroute to null. Do not override manual override. A single line, no buzzwords, no metrics, no bullshit, just truth. The room went quiet. Not because he said anything, he didn't, but because every eye turned to watch him read. And because in that silence, something shifted. The CEO didn't ask who wrote it. He didn't need to. He didn't demand a meeting or call for legal. He didn't yell at Vincent or the engineers or the interns now pretending they weren't interns. He just walked back to the center of the table and slid the clipboard down onto the surface, facing up. No words, no finger pointing, just a slow turn of his head toward Vincent. And then away, as if he already knew where the real failure began. The room stood still. The red ink bled like a warning flare across the sterile laminate surface of the conference table. She wasn't there. She didn't need to be, because the system spoke for her now. Because the clipboard, tossed aside as antiquated, was now the only piece of infrastructure still telling the truth. And the silence that followed, that was hers too. Monday morning, the building was quieter than usual. No scuff of loafers down the main corridor. No peppy morning huddle in the atrium. No faint drone of Vincent's voice projecting management cliches from behind frosted glass. Just absence. He was gone. No memo. No goodbye email. No Slack status change. No carefully drafted next chapter post on LinkedIn with a beach photo and a paragraph about growth mindset. He'd been surgically removed from the org chart. His desk cleared before sunrise. The nameplate outside his office. Gone like he was never there. Only the ghost of his cologne lingered. Inside the ops war room, things were quieter too. The screens still hummed, but the dashboards had reverted to legacy mode. The system had been rolled back over the weekend, silently, efficiently, by the few engineers who still remembered how. The legacy stack, the one that was supposed to be sunset, had risen like a phoenix from a pile of prematurely signed decommission forms. She didn't see it happen. She didn't need to. 9:17 a.m., her company Slack pinged to life. After a week of silence, her access had been reactivated. Channels she'd been removed from now shimmered unread with missed conversations. Her name reappeared on the ops tree. Admin rights restored, full permissions. Even the private hash exec liaison channel showed up in the sidebar. She didn't open it. The messages could sit. Let them. At 9:32 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number, internal exchange. Voicemail transcription popped up. Hey, this is Carol from the CEO's office. He'd like a quick chat when you're free. No rush, just give us a ring when you can. Thanks. She read it twice, then deleted it. At 9:41 a.m., she opened her LinkedIn. The connection requests had piled up, recruiters, old colleagues, people she hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly loving your insights and would love to reconnect. Funny how clarity sharpened after a single failure you didn't prevent, just predicted. She clicked into the headline editor, deleted her old title, typed Systems Whisperer, now consulting, no hashtags, no humble brag, just truth. She closed the laptop, set it gently on the kitchen table, and walked to the window with a cup of lukewarm coffee. Outside, the city pulsed as it always did, bothered by the internal collapse of a logistics empire that had almost eaten itself out of pride. Almost. Inside the CEO's office, a new fixture hung behind the door. The clipboard, same one, now clean, flattened, pressed behind glass, framed in dark walnut. You could still see the red ink bleeding at the bottom, crisp and calm. When the load index exceeds 9.2, failover will misroute to null. Do not override manual override. A quiet monument. A silent admission. No plaque, no attribution, just the line, and that was enough. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.